When I was reading Maria's story, the one that you flagged in the prep materials, it really struck me how a simple traffic stop
Yeah.
became like this incredibly charged experience for her just because of her race.
Right.
And it really got me thinking about how much does our racial identity actually shape our interactions with law enforcement? It feels like something we all really need to understand better,
Yeah.
especially now with everything going on.
It's such a relevant topic, and I
Yeah.
think what's so fascinating is that Maria's experience, it isn't just an isolated incident.
Right.
It really reflects this much broader pattern that's like so deeply woven into American history and society.
Yeah.
We can't talk about policing without acknowledging the role that race has played since like the very beginning of policing in America.
Okay, so let's unpack that history a little bit.
Okay.
I know we've got some sources that really dive into that.
We do.
So where should we start?
Well, to understand the present, we really need to go back to the past. Think about, for instance, the slave patrols in the South.
Right.
They were essentially the precursor to modern police forces, and their primary function was to control and oppress enslaved Black people. And that legacy of racial bias, it's something we're still grappling with today.
Yeah, that's a really powerful way to put it.
Yeah.
It's not just some abstract concept.
Exactly.
It's literally baked into the DNA of American law enforcement.
Yeah.
And one of his studies we have, I think it was from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, they found that Black individuals are 3 times more likely to be stopped by police than white individuals.
Yeah, that's a pretty stark statistic.
It is.
And that really highlights those ongoing disparities that exist. But one of the things that I thought was so surprising was that in the American Journal of Public Health, they had a study where they found that racial profiling wasn't just about the immediate encounter with police, but it actually led to increased rates of anxiety and stress disorders in the communities that are affected.
So it's not just about feeling uncomfortable in the moment.
No.
It's about the long-term psychological impact on entire communities.
Exactly. It's a really heavy finding when you think about it.
That is heavy stuff.
Yeah, and it gets even more complex when you consider, things like the Ku Klux Klan infiltrating police departments in the 20th century, Yeah. This really illustrates how deep these issues run. It wasn't just a few bad apples.
Right.
It was systemic efforts to use law enforcement as like a tool of racial oppression.
Wow.
So very deep, deep roots.
Yeah, it's so easy to think of this as a problem of the past. But then the Stanford Open Policing Project found something that I thought was really disturbing about modern-day traffic stops.
Okay.
They analyzed millions of records and found that Black drivers were 20% more likely to be stopped than white drivers, even when you're controlling for things like time of day,
Right.
the neighborhood that they were driving in.
Yeah.
And here's the kicker.
Yeah.
They were less likely to be found with illegal items.
It's so interesting, the way they went about that study.
Right.
They didn't just rely on police reports.
Okay.
They actually used a technique called Bayesian inference to account for potential biases in the data.
Hold on, Bayesian inference.
Yeah.
Can you break that down a little bit?
Sure. It's a statistical method that allows you to update your beliefs, essentially, based on new evidence.
Okay.
And in this case, they used it to kind of estimate the true rate of contraband among different racial groups, even if the police were more likely to search Black drivers.
So even when you account for potential bias in the way that police are conducting the stops and searches,
Exactly.
the disparity is still there?
Yes, and it
really makes you question the assumptions
Absolutely.
behind those stops in the first place.
Yeah. It brings up a lot of questions about implicit bias, those unconscious prejudices that we all kind of carry with us, even if we don't realize it.
Yeah, but hold on a second.
Yeah.
Because I did come across a source
Okay.
that argued that racial profiling is sometimes necessary for public safety.
Okay.
And they said that if certain crimes are statistically more common in certain communities.
Right. That's a very controversial argument.
Yeah.
And it's important to approach it with nuance.
Okay.
While statistics can be informative, using them to justify blanket profiling can perpetuate harmful stereotypes.
Right.
And lead to discriminatory practices.
Okay.
It's a slippery slope, for sure.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's not just about the numbers. It's about understanding the human impact of these policies and practices.
Absolutely.
Like Maria's story, feeling like a suspect just because of her race.
Exactly. And it's not just individuals.
Right.
It's about the impact on entire communities. Like, imagine living in a place where you constantly feel like you're being watched,
Right?
judged, and potentially targeted because of your skin color. That creates a climate of fear and distrust that can be incredibly damaging.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another point that I wanted to touch on.
Okay.
The idea of community policing.
Right.
We have a bunch of material
Yeah.
on initiatives like the Cop Yes program, which is supposed to build better relationships between law enforcement
Right.
and the communities that they serve,
Yeah.
especially minority communities. But some sources were like pretty skeptical about its effectiveness.
Yeah, you know, what I found really interesting was some of the skepticism came from police officers themselves.
Really?
Yeah, they felt like they were being scapegoated or told they were racist,
Oh.
which made them defensive and resistant to the training. So it seemed like even with the best intentions, there can be a lot of pushback.
So how do you get past that? How do you create real change if even the people who are supposed to be implementing the reforms are skeptical?
That is the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And there's not like an easy answer.
Right.
But one of the things that one of the sources suggested is that involving the community in the process from the beginning is really important.
So instead of imposing solutions from the top down, you're working together to find common ground.
Exactly.
And build trust.
Yeah, it's about creating a dialogue.
Right.
Where everyone feels heard and respected.
I like that. It feels more collaborative and less like a lecture.
Right. And it recognizes that the solutions aren't going to come from one side or the other.
Right.
It's going to take a collective effort to address these really complex issues.
Yeah, okay. I think we've laid some good groundwork here.
We have.
We've explored the historical roots of racial bias in policing, looked at some pretty disturbing statistics, and even started to touch on some potential solutions like community policing.
Yeah.
But we've only scratched the surface.
There's so much more to uncover.
Right.
We need to, delve deeper into the psychological impact of racial profiling, the role of the media in shaping perceptions, and, that ongoing debate over reforms and accountability.
Okay.
But I think we're off to a good start.
Yeah, definitely a good start.
For sure.
One thing that keeps coming up for me as we kind of explore all of this is the media's role in this.
Yeah.
We've got a few sources that talk about how news coverage, especially focusing on conflict, can really skew public perception.
It's true. The media often focuses on the most sensational aspects of a story.
Right.
And when it comes to policing, that often means highlighting instances of violence or misconduct.
Yeah.
And this can create a very distorted view of both law enforcement and the communities that they serve.
Yeah, one article we have even went so far as to say that the media's obsession with crime statistics and dramatic headlines actually contributes to that fear and mistrust that fuels racial bias in policing.
It's
almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way.
Yeah, it's a very complex issue, but I think it's worth considering.
Yeah.
How the way we consume news and information really influences our understanding of these issues. I think we need to be critical consumers of media.
Yeah.
And seek out diverse perspectives to get a more balanced view.
It feels like social media kind of adds another layer to this, right?
Oh, absolutely.
On the one hand, it gives a voice to people who might not otherwise be heard.
Right.
But it can also be used to spread, misinformation and amplify those harmful stereotypes.
It's true. The democratization of information through social media is a double-edged sword. It can be a powerful tool for raising awareness, holding those in power accountable.
Yeah.
But it can also be used to spread, fear and hate and division.
Yeah. One of the personal stories we have, Aisha's story, really stuck with me. She talks about being a young Muslim woman and feeling conflicted about police outreach after national events.
Yeah.
Wanting to connect with law enforcement, but also being wary of being stereotyped or targeted.
That's a really, really great point.
Yeah.
Aisha's story is a powerful reminder that these issues aren't just theoretical.
Right.
They have real-world consequences for people's lives.
Yeah.
And it really highlights that importance of building trust and understanding between law enforcement and those marginalized communities.
Yeah. Speaking of trust, I kind of wanted to circle back to the issue of bias training for police officers.
Okay.
Some of the research we have suggests that it hasn't always been as effective as we had hoped.
I think one of the reasons for that is the way that bias training is often approached.
Okay.
If officers feel like they're being lectured to or blamed, they're less likely to be receptive to the message.
One source actually compared traditional bias training to diversity day at an office.
Oh, interesting.
Like a one-time event that doesn't really change anything in the long run.
Oh, that's such a.
Great analogy.
Yeah.
I mean, to be truly effective, bias training needs to be ongoing, integrated into the culture of a police department, and focused on building empathy and understanding.
Okay.
And it also has to address the systemic issues
Right.
that contribute to racial bias, not just individual behavior.
It sounds like there's a need for a more nuanced approach.
Absolutely.
But even if you get buy-in from officers, isn't there still the issue of implicit bias?
Right.
Those unconscious prejudices that we all have?
That's one of the biggest challenges because implicit bias is so tricky because it's often operating below the level of our conscious awareness.
Right.
But there are techniques and practices that can help individuals become more aware of their biases and mitigate their impact.
One source talked about mindfulness as a tool for addressing that.
Okay.
Can you kind of expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, mindfulness is essentially the practice of paying attention to the present moment without judgment.
Okay.
And by becoming more aware of our thoughts and feelings.
We can start to identify and challenge those automatic biases that can influence our behavior.
So it's not about eliminating bias altogether.
No.
It's about recognizing it and taking steps to manage it.
Exactly. It's about being more intentional in our interactions and challenging those knee-jerk reactions that can lead to discriminatory behavior.
Okay, this is all like really thought-provoking.
It is.
But it can also feel kind of overwhelming,
It's a lot.
We've got this complex web of history and statistics and personal stories and media influence and implicit bias and where do we even begin to address all of this?
Right.
What can we as individuals actually do?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it's one that a lot of people are grappling with. But I think it's important to remember that change happens on multiple levels, individual, community, and systemic.
So it's not about just waiting for someone else to fix it.
Right.
We all have a role to play.
Exactly. We can start by educating ourselves and having honest conversations about these issues. We can support organizations that are working to promote racial justice and advocate for policy changes that address systemic bias.
Yeah.
And we can hold ourselves and each other accountable for creating a more just and equitable society.
I like that. It's about taking action on multiple fronts and recognizing that every effort, no matter how small, can contribute to positive change.
Yeah, one source put it really well. They said, the fight for racial justice is a marathon, not a sprint. It's going to take time, persistence, and a willingness to keep learning and growing.
What kind of stands out to you from everything that we've explored so far?
Yeah.
For me, it's the realization that this isn't just an abstract problem.
Right.
It's about real people, real lives, real fears, and real hopes.
For me, it's the interconnectedness of it all.
Yeah.
You know how historical injustices continue to kind of reverberate today? How media narratives shape our perceptions, how individual experiences are both unique and reflective of these larger patterns.
Yeah. And how even seemingly small actions can contribute to creating a more just and equitable world.
That brings us to a really important question.
Yeah.
Knowing all of this, what can you, as an individual, do to make a difference? What are some tangible steps you can take to address racial bias in policing and advocate for positive change in your own community?
Yeah.
And we're going to explore that question in more depth as we wrap up our deep dive.
We will.
But for now, just take a moment to reflect on what you've learned and what resonates with you most. So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
The history, the statistics, the personal stories, media's influence, complexities of bias training.
It's a lot.
It paints a pretty sobering picture, I think.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, knowing all of this, what are some concrete actions we can take to actually create real change?
One thing that really stood out to me from the materials you sent was the power of local engagement.
There are so many grassroots organizations working to, bridge the gap between law enforcement and communities of color.
Right, like that group we read about that organizes community dialogues.
Yes.
Between police officers and residents.
Exactly, and it doesn't have to be this huge time commitment.
Right.
Even volunteering a few hours a month or donating to these organizations can make a big difference.
Right.
Even amplifying their message on social media.
Yeah.
That's a powerful way to raise awareness and support their work.
It's about putting our knowledge into action.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
Not just talking about the problem.
Yeah.
But actually, doing something to address it.
For sure.
But let's be honest, sometimes these issues can feel so big.
Yeah.
And so systemic.
Yeah.
That it's hard to know where to even begin,
Oh, for sure.
As one person, What can I actually do?
Well, one thing that I think often gets overlooked is the power of conversation.
Okay.
Talking to our friends, family, colleagues about these issues, even if it's uncomfortable, can help to, shift perspectives and challenge those deeply ingrained biases.
I know those conversations can be tough.
They can.
But you're right, silence only perpetuates the status quo.
Exactly.
One source even suggested using this deep dive as a conversation starter.
I love that.
Sharing what we've learned with others and encouraging them to kind of dive deeper themselves.
What a great idea.
I
think so too.
What do you think?
Yeah. And remember, these conversations don't have to be confrontational.
Right.
It's really about listening to each other.
Yeah.
Sharing different perspectives and trying to find common ground. Even small shifts in understanding can have a ripple effect.
One of the sources put it this way. They said, change starts with a whisper.
I like that.
It's about planting those seeds of awareness and encouraging critical thinking.
Absolutely.
And don't underestimate the power of your vote.
Yes, so important.
Pay attention to the candidates running for office. Their stances on criminal justice reform, police accountability.
For sure.
Their commitment to addressing, racial disparity.
It all matters.
And holding our elected officials accountable. That's a crucial part of this.
It is.
And it's not just about national elections.
Right.
Local elections often have the most direct impact on policing in our communities.
So true. So do your research, get involved in those local campaigns, and make your voice heard at the ballot box.
Another thing that struck me from the materials was this emphasis on ongoing education. This deep dive is just a starting point.
It is. There are so many resources out there. Books, articles, documentaries, podcasts.
It's a lifelong journey.
It is. It really is a lifelong journey of learning and unlearning.
Yeah.
One source recommended following journalists and activists on social media who are, doing great work covering these issues.
Right.
That's a great way to kind of stay informed and engaged on a daily basis.
So it's about staying curious, challenging our own assumptions.
Very sure.
Continually expanding our understanding.
Absolutely. And remember, change doesn't happen overnight. It's a long, often messy process.
Right.
But every conversation we have, every action we take, every vote we cast, every dollar we donate,
right,
it all contributes to creating a more just and equitable future.
That's a collective effort, right?
It is. We're all in this together.
And like you said earlier, every small step matters.
Absolutely. Even if it feels like we're just making a ripple, those ripples can eventually create waves of change.
That's a really beautiful way to put it. And I truly believe that if we keep pushing for progress and keep demanding accountability and keep believing in the possibility of a better world, we can make a real difference.
I agree.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive. It's been an incredible journey of learning and reflection.
The pleasure was all mine. It's been inspiring to see your passion for this issue and your commitment to making a difference.
And to all of you listening out there, we hope this deep dive has given you the knowledge, the tools, and the inspiration to take action in your own communities.
Oh, we do.
We've included links to some of the resources that we mentioned in the show notes.
Right.
So you can continue your exploration.
Please do.
Remember, change starts with each and every one of us.
Yes.
So keep learning, keep questioning, keep pushing for progress, and let's create a world where justice and equity are a reality for all.